Welcome to the Rock's Back Pages podcast. I'm Barney Hoskins, and I'm here in person again with Mark Pringle.
Hi, Barney.
And Jasper Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
Hello, guys. And today we are joined by the legendary Paul Morley. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks.
It's a great pleasure to have you here, Paul. We're going to be talking...
It's great to be here.
He said sincerely.
No, that's mank for you know.
That's heartfelt.
That's
gushing,
really sincere. I'm weeping.
We're going to talk about and sort of around and inspired by this fantastic new book you are about to publish called From Manchester with Love, The Life and Opinions of Tony Wilson, which is so much more than a biography of the late Tony Wilson of Factory fame. It is a sprawling love letter to your city of Manchester, where you obviously came from and you've written widely about. So we're going to talk about, Factory, we're going to talk about Joy Division, we're going to talk about the 2 or 3 pieces that are relevant to this on the homepage this week. But let's start by just, what got you into music? What was your gateway into popular music, Paul?
I think television and radio, in a funny sort of way. It really accelerated for me about 1970 when I was 13. And suddenly I remember seeing T-Rex on Top of the Pops doing Ride a White Swan.
That was your gateway.
Well, it was Get It On in my case.
Yeah, but Ride a White Swan was eerily spectacular. Because I suppose also at 13 I'd missed hippies and I'd missed underground clubs and I'd missed the Twisted Will. I'd missed Manchester music scenes. So, at a certain age you come across music and you get it in a full blood. And what you're getting is a kind of almost a compacted history of the music of the last 10 years. You don't know that.
Yeah.
So I didn't know Mark had been a mod, he'd been around, he'd been a hippie, he'd done all these things. Just suddenly you're seeing it was only about 2 minutes and it was just him and Mickey Finn sat on a stool. And you couldn't understand a word they said. And their hair was down to their ankles, and my dad was upset, and
my mum was upset.
Yeah,
yes.
But it was so glamorous and it was so sexy.
Yes, totally.
And it's contagious, isn't it? I mean, you talk about Get It On, but I still now can feel dropping the needle onto that opening bass of Get It On, which again, you don't know how it's happened or how it's arrived at that. You don't know anything about Tony Visconti. You don't know he's pushing the bass up loud because he thinks he's the lead musician. You just feel something that is sound more than anything. So I think, radio, television, and therefore sound. Yeah. Sound of records.
Yeah. Well, I totally concur, and I still think the T-Rex sound that Visconti kind of fashioned was one of the great rock sounds.
And when people were being very snobby about them, which they were at the time, because at Teeny Bop, it was dangerous to be a T-Rex fan at my school because it was all ELP, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and I was T-Rex and David Bowie. But the sound was actually more radical, heavier, deeper, more beautiful than that sound. And you couldn't have articulated it, although I guess I started to write because I wanted to. But you kind of knew it instinctively. It was a better sound.
So what made you want to write, and were there particular music journalists that you discovered in sort of the early to mid-70s?
Yes, I mean, music papers were another important element coming into Stockport, arriving every Wednesday, Thursday. Initially NME mostly, but then Sound started around that period. I always remember it because it gave away a free poster in the first 2 or 3 issues, which is, again, got you. But indirectly what was great about all sorts of rock journalists, whether they were British or American, is that it was also very connected to new journalism. It was connected to certain sorts of literary writing. It was literary in itself. I wanted to be a writer. I'd been very condescended to from all areas of life about that prospect, as if there was no chance, and I'd get a job, but it wouldn't be the job I wanted, and I'd stay in Stockport forever. But I just wanted to write, and by looking at some of these writers and how they wrote, it wasn't formal. I didn't have to train to do it. In fact, they were training me. I realised I could do it, and I started literally just scribbling notes in my bedroom about music I liked, making little bits and pieces, and being influenced by a lot of the more way out writers, because I stumbled across a couple of books that I can almost not even remember now, but people like Richard Meltzer were featured in them, and the way that he structured a piece, and it was connected very much to Tom Wolfe's New Journalism compilation, which was connected very much to a lot of science fiction with, J.G. Ballard. So, 12, 13, 14, you're making these extraordinary leaps very quickly, and without knowing it, you're learning a style. Now, people obviously, for the last 50 50 years have condemned me for this style. But it's a style I found for myself because of reading these great experimental writers with form and transmitting and communicating their enthusiasm. And it connected with some of the writers you would be reading in the music papers over here, like Angus MacKinnon, Idris Walters, Ian MacDonald. You know, they wrote in a wonderful way. It wasn't just about being a critic. It was about writing and how you did that and how you wrote about music. And obviously loads of great music was coming into Manchester because of the Free Trade Hall. We had lots of great venues. And it all combined, really, that suddenly I could write, and the enemy was so attractive and addictive because it was transmitting underground versions of the world in a mainstream way. So you get it in the newsagent, local newsagent. It was ridiculous what you were actually getting, and I don't think IPC really knew what they were giving out. No. And it was setting people on fire. And you know, even in that early Manchester, you know, when the first Sex Pistols show, 1976, and you went along and there were about 40 other people, and you just knew what you were coming across more than anything else with other readers of the music papers, because they were, you know, and listening to Peel, but definitely reading the music papers and piecing together a really interesting history of music and finding interesting things very quickly because of it.
Yes. And that culminated in what I'm holding in my hand now, dear listeners. You can't see it, but it is the one. It's a sort of almost like a facsimile or a...
Yes, I've never seen it before, actually.
It's like someone's
hand-drawn it.
Yeah, out there, the issue one, the only issue, of the fanzine that you put together in your bedroom in Manchester in, the summer of 76?
Yeah, it started probably late 75 in a funny sort of way, because it took me a bit of time to get it going. So therefore, I started it before punk. And then punk arrived just as I was about to put it out. So there's all sorts of last-minute additions, which I quite like. And the fact that I put Bob Dylan on the cover is interesting.
Well, I know, that is interesting.
There's a blood on the tracks moment,
and Ted Nugent appears in this.
Well, what that was, because there was a friend of mine, I think it was called Tony Turner. I used to work in a bookshop, and all these wonderful mavericks and waifs and strays used to come in with their own taste. And I used to go into Manchester Saturday morning, buy a load of bootlegs, bring them back to Stockport and sell them for 50p more than I paid for. And I'd get rid of about 20 on the Saturday. So
entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. Crazy. And I could afford my own records, you know.
Business podcast now.
That's exactly it. That's what we had. Our podcast was people coming in the shop, and one of the, you know, and I wanted to get people other than me writing for it. And Tony was a huge Ted Turner fan.
Ted Nugent.
Ted Nugent.
Ted Turner as well.
Ted Turner.
Yeah, the next issue would have featured Ted.
Yeah, that would have been the 90s fanzine. But what was interesting, it was just like then that enthusiasm for things, and it was pre-Trumpian Nugent, if you like. You know, it was right when eventually, of course, I had a legendary encounter with Ted Nugent.
You did.
But it was just that sense. It was almost Ted Nugent coming out of Nuggets more than the Ted Nugent we think of now, if you know what I mean. And Tony Turner, that's why I keep mixing it up. He was definitely into that Nuggets punk, which again was another big input into the world at the time. Lenny Kaye's sort of, you know, distribution of these amazing, you know, obscure records. You know?
Indeed. And I love the whatever you call that, the sort of tagline or descriptive prose for dancing to.
Isn't that weird?
I love that.
I know.
Because in a way, you know, that's what you did. You wrote prose for dancing.
It's become a manifesto, funnily enough, without me knowing why I was doing. You know how sometimes instinct is a sort of hint of the future. I just had an instinct. That's what I was doing, and I knew even then that people were a little upset with what I did.
Yeah.
As it's grown exponentially into the land of Amazon, they loathed it. You know, viscerally, what I was doing. But I loved it, and it came out of the things I loved. So I wanted to put it on there as almost a badge of honour, as a sort of claim, you know, and I will not be moved. You know?
yeah, absolutely.
It's like that quote, writing about music is like dancing about architecture.
The Zappa quote. Yeah. I mean, Mark, you pointed out this morning that actually the earliest piece by Paul we heard from NME is 76.
October 76.
That's right.
Buzzcocks.
First piece I ever wrote, Buzzcocks. I wrote it down to my interview with Nick Logan, going backwards on the intercity train, feeling sick. But he wanted something. He'd said to me,
fantastic.
Can you bring a piece? And I hadn't got any pieces. So I'd just seen Buzzcocks, supported by Generation X, along Deansgate. And I wrote it backwards, handwritten. And I wrote many of my early pieces handwritten until I think it was Phil McNeil sort of ordered me almost to get a typewriter. And I got a typewriter.
There's only one Nick Kent is allowed in this.
Yeah,
yes, that's very true. Of course, I didn't know that. So obviously for them, it was hell on earth. They had, someone else's handwriting.
Another one.
And I wrote it as neat as I could.
Unlike Nick.
And I remember handing it to Nick, just as an example of my work. And I had no idea, but I went to the newsagent the next week to buy my NME, and it was bloody well in.
Fantastic.
Under Tony Victor Parsons on Dr. Feelgood. And I've always sort of claimed, well, I had the better taste then. Because he was just slightly behind the beat with the Feel-Goods, but I was just ahead of the beat with Buzzcocks.
I mean, it is an exciting moment, isn't it? When you see
you were at the Sex Pistols Free Trade Hall.
Yes,
show.
for both of them. Yes.
Right.
Yes, Tony, funnily enough, wasn't at the first one, although he claimed almost to the point of blackmailing
like
people
10,000
that he was.
other people.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Yes, that's
I mean,
right.
I was there, obviously.
So was I,
was
actually, as it
there.
happened.
Jasper wasn't there, but only because he wasn't. But he wanted to be there.
There were a few people there that weren't born, funnily enough.
I mean, what was your, once you got your foot in the door there, I mean, what was your sense of Enemy at that time, the culture at Enemy?
Difficult, because there was a period not long after I started, probably a few months after I started, because initially I was just doing live reviews, handwritten, posting them in the postbox.
So handwritten for a while?
Yes. Posting them in the postbox, which is where we were at the time. So I would post them, There was one or two editors there weren't so sure about me. Phil McNeil wasn't so sure. And there was a time, actually, when I did not get any work for quite a while, and I was a bit nervous, but Angus McKinnon got me writing again. I'll always be grateful, because, stuck up in Manchester, you just think, oh, is that it? Because, back then, even then, provincial music was still looked upon maybe just as a passing phase and using for a bit, and then it's gone. But then Angus used me again, and it warmed up, and very quickly I started to get features, which was the big breakthrough. And Tony Stewart used to give me a lot of features, and that secured it, because it's odd, people just think it's secure, but of course it isn't, and it's always very wobbly.
You were living in Manchester. When did you ever move down to London on a permanent basis?
Yes, because what started happening was there's this rumour of a staff job.
Right.
And that was just extraordinary, a staff job.
Sure.
And I got told that when David Bowie and when Iggy Pop came up with David Bowie on keyboards, Chalky Davis, and I can't remember who the writer would have been, told me if I got the interview with David Bowie, I'd get the staff job. So I was trying all sorts of ways to get into the theatre in Manchester to get hold of David Bowie. It was, because I really took it seriously, that I'd get the staff job, But in the end, I moved down to London because I was promised a lot of work.
Right.
I never officially got the staff job. They put me in the staff box.
Right.
To give it a bit of hoof, but I never got the staff job. I got a 20 quid a week retainer.
Yeah, what year would that have been?
Well, I actually moved down in 79-80.
Right.
To Tony Wilson's eternal disgust.
Yes.
Tony actually tried to stop me. He tried to get me a job at Granada Television to keep me up north.
Yeah.
Not least because of his belief in the north was very much that he didn't want people to leave.
Yeah.
And I was leaving. But also, he wanted me to write about his factory acts,
Yes.
And he lost me slightly. Thinking I would go. And I never thought that I was leaving to go to London. For me, I was leaving to go to the NME.
Right.
It wasn't a place. It was what I wanted. And I always said to him, you went to Cambridge, you had ITN, you had Granada, you had Factory.
Absolutely.
This was all of that for me in one place. And it didn't necessarily mean I would stop writing about factory acts, although I did, because I was banned from doing it by the NME because they thought I must be on staff at Factory. And that's legendary, because Tony then hated me even more. Not only had I left, but instead of writing about Crispy Ambulance, I was writing about Dollar.
Yes.
And he absolutely...
I remember that transition.
Yes.
And I wrote about Dollar as if it was Crispy Ambulance.
Yes.
Which confused everybody, not least
And
Dollar and
Crispy
Trevor
Ambulance
Hall.
as if it was Dollar.
Yes, that's right. And Tony thought I'd done it on purpose. As, he could have a legendary sulks for years, and he thought I'd betrayed him and Manchester, etc., etc. And I tried to explain they won't let me write any more about Factory because,
Yes, too close to.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote from this description of the unique character that is Anthony H. Wilson. And this is a typically Morley-esque kind of list of attributes that I absolutely loved. An unstable, mildly radical, wing and a prayer mix of Cambridge incubated smartness, outside underground press irreverence, forensic new journalism attitude, haywire broadcasting brains, situationist stained slapstick, confidential northern sass, and weekly music paper energy, combining oblique talent spotting, spoof and analysis. I thought that was a pretty nice summary of this guy that you would have first become aware of. What I mean, when can you remember first seeing him like hanging around at a gig? Or I would have been on TV first.
Well, TV first, so that when we did see him at gigs, it was most uncomfortable. It was like going to see Animal Collective and Richard Madeley's there.
Who was a friend of his? Right?
Yes, they were a friend
of Tony.
Tony's a huge influence on Richard Madeley.
And Judy, Richard and
Judy, and for a while
they're both quoted.
They were the three.
Book. It's extraordinary.
Fantastic.
They were a double take. Surely not.
No, they were three: Richard and Judy and Tony. They did it as a three-piece. They were a trio, and then they became a double act.
That's too funny.
But yes, and what was interesting is he would always turn up at gigs in the early 70s and kind of be booed because he was the man off the telly, and he was slightly older than the rest of us.
Right?
Yeah,
he was 26.
Yes, but back then that was huge, wasn't it?
Sure, of course.
Because by 30, everything was all over, you thought.
Yeah.
So the
Time's running
26
out.
was huge, and he had that long hair that always looked a bit suspicious, but also it was just, there was something about his manner even then, the way he swanned into a show. I remember, funnily enough, seeing Rory Gallagher, and one of my favourite gags in the book is actually his favourite Gallagher is Rory Gallagher.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah, there you go. For a lot of us. And then when I did Out There, I think what was interesting about Tony is he sort of put together crews, if you like, teams of people. It was not unlike the fact what he did when he worked in TV. If he worked in TV, he'd have a cameraman, he'd have a sound man, he'd have a researcher. And he kind of did that a lot. Some of us who were writers became part unofficially of his writing team. Hannett obviously became the sound man. Savile's graphics,
Right, yeah.
Alan Erasmus is executive producer or whatever, without portfolio. And Tony was very good at putting people around him and using what they showed and gave him and recommended to him and making it his own. As a broadcaster, and he did this well with Manchester and Hacienda, he could take a lot of information, hearing, acid rave, what's that? And he could give it a headline.
Yeah.
And he could become the person who publicised it and become, therefore, the representative, if you like.
I vividly remember So It Goes, when So It Goes, because I saw the Pistols on it, I saw Joy Division on it, and a lot of other stuff. And it was curious, because this man who looked like a regional weatherman.
That's right.
Presenting really interesting music, but he was dressed like sort of middle management sort of thing. He was very memorable. I remember being slightly riveted by this guy. Who is this man? Who we've never heard of down here.
Yes, that's right. Once he got distributed beyond Granada, where we were used to him, introducing Elvis Costello, Devo at 6:15. The rest of the world were quite stunned. And the first responses to So It Goes, memorably, Charles Shaw Murray's, was a kind of hatred, a kind of condescension, a kind of viciousness that really did stun Tony and sent him off into the dark for quite a while because he was so hurt. Because in a way, what he was trying to do, and we had to forgive his jacket and his hair because who knew what we were looking like then, was really radical and really interesting. And it was above just being a music show. It involved all sorts of things in that show, that was very difficult and dangerous to pull off. So the idea that not only was he being battered by the ITV companies who weren't showing it, but the people he thought would be on his side were battering him as well,
Yes,
exactly. I remember it so vividly. It was so different from any other music or cultural show that I'd seen.
No, it was Clive James was on there, there was all sorts of strange sort of other world, what we would now unfortunately know as world music was on there. So all sorts of experimental music. It was, as they say these days, a broad church. But because of that, then he was interested in getting things on first as a journalist. Granada had the Beatles on TV first. He wanted the Sex Pistols on TV first as a sort of continuation of what he loved about Granada,
Exactly. I mean, you make the point that he could have settled for becoming, I don't know how you put it, but like a slightly more radical Michael Parkinson or something. And so for him to dip a toe into the world of putting on gigs and then Factory Communications and then the label, I mean, it was bold. Even if it was in some ways a little dilettante-ish.
It was all of that. And then, of course, for many people, it did look a bit dilettante-ish. And, of course, it was inherited money. I mean, Bill Drummond in Liverpool was always angry with Tony because Tony kept saying, do it yourself, do it yourself, do it yourself. He said, it's all right for you. You've had inherited money and you've got a full-time job,
Yes.
Yeah.
And you went to Cambridge. And the Granada factory thing was interesting because it was fundamental to what made Tony so unique. But there was always big battles within it because the Granada people didn't want him to do factory. The factory people couldn't believe he kept doing Granada. He wouldn't sacrifice one for the other. He was very nervous.
Right to the end.
Right to the end. He would never,
which I'd forgotten.
No. Is that sort of insecurity, thinking that if he gave one thing up, he could lose a lot?
Yes. And he wasn't quite sure. And to an extent, factory started as a kind of one-off. The factory sample could have been it in the same way that Spiral Scratch by Buzzcocks could
it was also a
one-off.
Not the Hacienda, but the original factory club, which was basically in a sort of fairly run-down past time.
Yes, a sort of busman drivers club, one story building. A lot of it done because of Erasmus is quiet, elusive, non-specific partner. I mean, he fell into the music business to help Alan, in a way, because
Right.
Alan had a bunch of musicians that they eventually named Duety Column that he didn't know what to do with, and they put the club on to put Duety Column on.
Interesting.
And then, cut a long story short, we all came across Joy Division when Joy Division was so bloody furious about being kept waiting till 2:00 in the morning at some audition show. They were extraordinary, having previously been, interesting. And then suddenly they were fierce. And Tony was there that night, Rob Gretton was there that night, I was there that night, and that was a spark that started 78.
Sure.
And Tony meets Gretton, Gretton becomes part of it. Weird communities, weird scenes forming very quickly as they did in these cities.
I mean, the way it sort of helped. I mean, Manchester's a big city, but compared to London, it's kind of a small town.
It's tiny.
That sort of the proximity. The same thing that happened later with Bristol and places like that.
Yes.
That people are just close enough to keep bumping into each other.
That's
at
right.
Different places.
And what emerges is there's a producer, Martin Hannett, who, when he did Spiral Scratch, kind of didn't know what he was doing because it was early days for him to do it. And Pete Shelley's dad, who paid for that, was sat at the back of the studio going to John Marr. I don't think he knows what he's doing. And Peter Savile's there and Malcolm Garrett are there, these graphic designers.
Absolutely.
So people are there, writers, photographers, we're all there at this moment because of all sorts of cultural, historical circumstances.
But it is fantastic because the standard is so high right across all these disciplines.
Yeah.
It's not like, the music was great, but the graphics weren't so good or whatever. I mean, the graphics are fantastic.
Well, they were the thing that immediately lifted into international status because I remember it was a big moment for me when I got the sleeve for Unknown Pleasures because suddenly I thought there's a local band that I know and I could literally put that between the Velvet Underground and Roxy Music, and it belongs.
Yeah.
Even if only visually.
Yeah.
And the fact that we made the claim that it also belonged musically, which was looked upon a bit askance, was also true. Whether you will that into myth or what, it kind of was.
It's quite funny. I think is it Stephen Morris in the audio interview you're going to listen to a bit later. He talks about the problem with Peter Savile's album covers is they took so long to be delivered. He would just prevaricate. So every release would be delayed because he was still working on the cover.
And Tony indulged that.
Well, that's right. That's why they didn't put any catalogue numbers or titles or whatever, or maybe a catalogue number, but not a title or a name of a group because they didn't know what was going to go in the sleeve. and the great thing about Savile, of course, was that he didn't really listen to the music. But a great example of that for me is Blue Monday. It's a great sleeve, and you think, oh wow, he got the music right. He hadn't really heard the music, but what he'd come across in the studio was an early piece of digital storage that really intrigued him, like a floppy disk. Mm-hmm. So he made the sleeve dedicated to the floppy disk, not the music. Music was neither here nor there. And then that great moment when it almost became Peter Savile's New Order, as in Andy Warhol's Velvet Underground, which almost, would have been so fantastic.
That would have been fantastic. I want to mention two of the pieces that were featuring by you. One is, because you alluded to the transformation of Joy Division, and it's that great review of them at Band on the Wall where you're realising they've changed into something really powerful and multi-dimensional. It's a fantastic piece. But later than that is this great piece, New Stirrings on the Northwest Frontier, which was published in January 1979, just before the Factory Sample comes out, right? So you identify 3 acts to focus on. These are the stirrings, 2 of which, of course, no one ever talks about anymore. Spherical Object, Who Day, and The Passage, who I did see play in London. I mean, people do still talk about. Yeah,
they were pretty extraordinary, actually. But
the third was Joy Division.
Yes.
And, and I think it's not entirely clear in terms of the editing. I think it is Curtis talking. I mean, all the quotes are from Ian, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, just about Ian speaking. Because, I got the 4 of them. Rob Gretton, their manager, never wanted them to do interviews because he reckoned they had nothing to say.
Yeah.
And he was right. So people like us filled in for him. Because the great thing about being a rock journalist, you make myths. And here was this myth I had because there was an empty space where there should have been the talk, especially after Ian died. Ian had a go at talking, but they didn't really have anything to say to the extent that when we were discussing what should go on the cover, Steve of Spherical Objects was a bit like a Brian Eno, and he talked wonderfully.
Yes, he's very loquacious.
And I remember saying, unfortunately in front of Kevin Cummins, so he's never let me forget it, maybe we should put Steve on the cover instead of Ian, which neglects to mention the rest of the conversation where we would fight tooth and nail to put Ian on the cover, and all of Ian, because Ian only went on as a part of the cover. And Kevin, even then, was taking pictures of Ian Curtis, as he always said, leaving that space in the top left-hand corner for NME, which down at the NME would have been thought of as madness, that we were imagining, Ian Curtis would go on the cover. And Kevin, in a way that I was imagining future, where Joy Division were what they are now, Kevin also is imagining forward. So that first piece with his pictures in the snow on Hume, when Manchester was shut down that day, extraordinary. But they were very little known.
Of course.
And they were just wearing the clothes maybe their father gave them, or their grandfather, or charity clothes, which luckily suited, because they looked a bit like Kraftwerk.
It was a perfect new kind of fashion in a way, wasn't it?
Nothing. So there was still I remember the big fight between Ian Curtis and Joe Jackson to go on the cover of the NME very early, and I think Joe Jackson won that one. So it was still difficult to explain, In
the left-hand corner.
Jackson. Well, you know what those NME meetings were like, those fights we'd have, typewriters out the window.
I remember one involving, is it Paul Young on the cover or Tom Waits?
That is spectacular. That's it.
Who's going to endure the longer, do we think? There's this quote, it's quite uncanny to read this quote from Ian to you, and we'd like to stay on the outside. We'd love it if Tony Wilson said he'd pay us to do an album on Factory. So quaint. That would be great. We can't afford to do it ourselves, which we'd want. But you either stay outside the system or you go in totally and try and change it. Well, so in a way, that prompts me to ask about the whole nature of Factory, and don't go down to London, don't sign to a major, we can do this here.
It got embedded in Tony's historical sense of everything, not just music, and his historical sense of the north and of Manchester and of Salford, and that what he called the project, even before other people did. And at the time, we used to think he was odd for this, because he would build up Manchester, he would talk about Manchester, he would make Manchester seem important. And of course, he was relating it back to the 19th century, Industrial Revolution, a city where firsts happened, innovation, and it was in decay and it was in decline. And not a lot was happening in the mid-70s. And he actually imagined that he could regenerate the city in an extraordinary way, in a way that initially seemed laughable. But it was part of what he was kind of doing, and it affected his decisions that he made with Gretton and Erasmus, especially about Factory. Basically, somewhere that was at the edge of somewhere and always seemed off-centre and in fall to the south. Why couldn't it be at the centre of the universe?
Sure.
And it had been in many, many ways.
Manchester's changed enormously as a city since then. But how much do you think the spark for what is now the predictable capitalist developer sort of
luxury apartments?
How much was Factory and Hacienda part of the spark which sort of got that going?
Well, he was unofficially involved in all sorts of decision making, because as a broadcaster he had these ridiculous contacts with mainstream politics.
Yes.
So he was not only this subversive character mucking around with the idea of a radical communications company, but he also could inspire and motivate and needle mainstream politicians in his role as a broadcaster. And I remember, I think I put it in the book, there was a sense in the 80s, 70s, 80s, Manchester was competing with Barnsley and Stockport about getting a new shopping centre.
Right.
And Wilson more or less inspired the notion that you should be competing with Sydney and Los Angeles for the Olympic Games. And eventually they got the Commonwealth Games.
Yes.
Those things definitely came from Wilson. The other thing about the architecture of the city, the only modernist building in Manchester for a long time was the Granada Television Studios, built in the 50s. The Hacienda came along in the early 80s. It was about the next one along, apart from the obvious concrete sort of skyscrapers. And that was a Tony thing as well. Why shouldn't we have a New York-style club in Manchester? It was preposterous, and for many years it was preposterous, and it didn't exist in a conventional world. But it inspired, for better or worse, and Savile comes up with a phrase, be careful what you wish for. The whole of the city centre living now is for me, spread from Hacienda along the canal. Loft-style living, that's beyond the music. That's a different kind of ambition he has.
Slightly helped by the IRA blowing up the Arndale Centre?
Yes, and those moments that change history, Tony's very good at sort of coming along and adjusting to as well. It's why the book got delayed for many reasons. Not least, it took me 5 years to get hold of Alan Erasmus, but also because the Manchester Arena bombing. Changed Manchester considerably from where Wilson was much more in the centre of it to another kind of city.
Right.
And Wilson's position in that history is therefore changed.
Right.
Because he's not that guy we all, in the 20th century, all excited about, Factory, Happy Mondays, Hacienda, Wilson. He's almost a figure that's slipping back into the 20th century, and his influence is becoming much more ghostly.
Yeah. I want to relate this to, there's a very sort of startling quote from Peter Saville in the book. Ian's death, the death of Ian Curtis, is the point at which the proceeds of Joy Division's sales create the empowering facilitator of money for Tony, for Factory. And then I'll skip the next bit, but he says this, I mean, the entire Factory history is based on the capital that is Ian's life, without a doubt. Tragedy that made the city happen the way it did. What did you feel when he said that to you?
Peter said it to me many times.
Right, okay, in different ways.
In different ways. And we all thought it to an extent because we remembered when suddenly a company that had no money had money, and they didn't really have an experience knowing what to do with the money. Mm-hmm. And their intention, because of the Factory Club and one or two other things they'd seen that they didn't really work for them, and going to see, the Danceteria, the Mud Club, or the New York clubs, they wanted one of those, and they genuinely had a sincere, naive or sophisticated, whichever way you look at it, community spirit. Why doesn't Manchester have one of those? Why isn't it built by an architect? Why doesn't it look fantastic? Why isn't it stylish? Why do we always go to scruffy clubs and get treated, terribly? Why can't we have a club that's almost like an experiment in communication and has other things on, like William Burrs at the time would be there, and Bernard Manning? It was a weird Dada variety club for a while.
Yeah.
And but it was a genuine sort of commitment to something, and they had the money to do it. And of course, the joke was, that all of Joy Division's money goes into it, and then very early, Stephen Morris especially would be going along and paying to get into his own club because there was no quite sort of clear view of how it worked. And Tony talks, I remember Tony saying about how, they got cabs to get everybody home in the early hours of the morning from the Hacienda. And it took him a while to realise that everybody in the club was using these free cabs to get to every single party around Manchester for quite a while, and they were getting these huge cab bills. So for a while, it was a formless, strange thing before sort of Mike Pickering and collaborators sort of realised that it needed a central purpose, which was dance.
Yeah, yes.
Much to Tony's surprise, in a way, because he wasn't really a dance fan,
And it took a while for the dance nights to really start working, didn't it? I mean,
yes.
So years ago, I was talking to Mike Pickering about it. Said,
yes.
It really felt like an uphill struggle for a long time.
Yeah, there were still moments even with the dance that it wasn't really what it became. And then, of course, rather wonderfully, when it did become it, and Mike Pickering was getting access to these great dance records and making great dance records, Tony didn't want them on Factory. So when Ride on Time is number one,
that's on Pete Hadfield's Deconstruction, which is Pete Hadfield was
the manager.
The manager. Our single was the first Deconstruction single, and the second one was it a Pickering one? It was one of something along those lines. It really was, yeah.
Yeah. Tony could have had
Tony could have had all of that.
They've thrown a party to congratulate Mike on being number one of the charts, and at the same time Factory are launching their classical label, selling maybe 12 copies.
Right, yeah.
And in a way, Tony was more comfortable with those maverick decisions rather than making the easy decision, even though it was obvious. He didn't want to do that because then it would devalue it, it would cancel it out.
But then, of course, the great irony is that New Order themselves became a sort of serious dance act in many respects. At least they love dance music, as you said. Every time they went to New York, they'd be down sort of at the Paradise Garage, for God's sake. Watching Larry Levan. So Wilson's blind spot about dance is really frustrating in a way, isn't it?
I think that's right. Look, we'll talk about New Order in a minute, actually, but I just want to ask you as a sort of last thing, apart from just recommending this book to anyone who loves Manchester, loves Factory, loves Joy Division, Tony Wilson. I mean, it's an exextraordinary book.
And
it's very
biographies.
Huh?
And loves biographies.
And loves biographies.
I wanted to write a kind of biography that about a rock. A subject, if you like, that is also just a biography about a really fascinating, complicated person as well.
Yeah,
because otherwise you do get bogged down a little bit into that sentimental nostalgia side of it. To me, I wanted to just represent a complicated, unusual, magnificent, irritating figure.
Completely. Well, and it's From Manchester with Love from Paul Morley. It's what it is, and I really recommend it. I was utterly absorbed by it. I do want just briefly to ask you whether your experience, writing about Factory, being around, Tony, Alan Erasmus, Rob Gretton, etc., how did that influence your time at ZTT with Trevor?
Well, considerably.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, Wilson has been a huge influence on me in lots of ways that have been difficult for me in some ways because I wasn't built like him. But he showed you could do other things. So I found myself slipping into it, forming virtually a record label, into broadcasting, into television, things I wasn't comfortable with. And I was much more of a shy bedroom kid than Tony ever was and didn't really have his media training. But absolutely, he made you think you could do that in the way that he encouraged Savile. I mean, this is the great thing about Wilson, as infuriating as he could be, as bitchy as he could be. He was also a great encourager, and you found yourself being inspired by him without really understanding it, And ZTT, he never talked to me about ZTT.
Did he not?
No. Gretton
not even to pat you on the back?
No, because it wasn't about Manchester.
Right, okay. So it didn't exist.
It didn't exist. Even when
It's not real.
For 9 weeks.
And Frankie was from Liverpool.
And Frankie was from Liverpool.
Yeah, even worse.
Gretton did, of course. Gretton was always, you just stole all our ideas. Which I did and I didn't. I had other ideas of my own.
I think that's right, yeah.
But no, there was no doubt that what I wanted to do, and I made it almost a part of my initial dream was have this amazing house producer like they had. They had Hannett and Trevor Horn. Cool. But Trevor Horn had a Fairlight, and they wouldn't allow Martin Hannett to have a Fairlight because they did the Hacienda instead of giving Martin the Fairlight, which caused great kerfuffles because he wanted great records, not a great building. He wanted great records. I had access to great records because of Trevor. But I wanted to do it. First of all, I wanted to see if I could make a guy who'd been in the Buggles hip. So I made his next group Art of Noise and made them a completely different thing, which I really took great pride in doing. And also I just wanted to apply some of the principles of learning and knowledge and excitement and glamour that we were all getting from popular culture, and what popular culture was that Factory had definitely inspired me into thinking, and put it into a label that was also popular.
Sure.
And so I was very, very, always waiting for the moment Tony would either beat me up for plagiarism or congratulate me, and I got neither. I got just indifference and a few years sulking.
I was assigned to write the cover story on ZTT, and it's coming back to me now that the headline, it wasn't my headline, was "How to Make a Spectacle of Yourself."
Yes.
I think this is,
yes.
ZTT and the fine art of
Is
making...
that Monty Smith, do you think, or something?
I don't know. I think Monty was gone by then, so I'm not sure who drummed that one.
Yeah, you do
up.
These really sincere intellectual articles, and then you give it a bit of... I always remember, it puzzled me for years when I did Lou Reed, and the headline was, "I love it when you talk dirty." And I didn't know what they meant for years, and I suddenly realised, they thought I was too soft on him. Which is bloody Lou Reed, he gave me half an hour, had a stopwatch and walked off halfway through a question.
Standard Lou Reed
The idea
experience.
of being soft on him, but and it was, and I worked to get this interview, and that's what their bloody headline was.
That is fantastic. Another of the pieces is this piece I remember very well, which is your review of the first London show by New Order. The Haunting of Heaven. I remember being haunted by that very title because I had come slightly late to Joy Division.
Yes.
I never saw them live, and I bought Unknown Pleasures and Closer, and fell head over heels for them, and so I was intrigued by this idea that they were someone going to go on. And your piece is very honest about how awkward it is and how nervous they are, and obviously Bernard can't really sing and all of this stuff, but it's actually very moving as well. It's a moving piece about what happens after Ian commits suicide.
Yes.
And that's really, I think, quite a good sort of segue into hearing the first of the clips.
Yeah, so I mean, this is Bernard Sumner, or Barney, depending on who you're talking to at the time.
Yes, let's call him Bernard for the purposes of the podcast.
And he's talking about some music after Joy Division.
Yeah.
After Joy Division finished, a lot of music changed. Not just ours, but a lot of people's music changed. Well, you can't topping yourself. So all the other groups that were our competition, Blew away in the wind. Because no one had the guts to top themselves.
I mean, that's almost as shocking in a way. I know it's 6 years after the fact, but it's almost as shocking as the Peter Saville quote to hear Bernard
But I think
that.
it was the way we were all dealing with it at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember I did a New Order documentary, and I mocked up a quiz show where New Order were on a quiz show that was about New Order. And I always remember when the question was, who's the laziest member in the group? This was 1991. Who's the laziest member in the group? And Hooky went, Ian Curtis. He hasn't done a fucking thing for years.
and that is Mancunian humour,
and it was the way we were dealing with it. And also we were all in shock. I mean, all of us. I had a suicide elsewhere with my father. We were all in shock in all sorts of ways. And I think we're also in a kind of guilt, because I don't know about how you approach this, but when you were listening to certain music and these lyrics were extraordinary, they're saying so much about certain things, and you weren't in a funny sort of way paying attention. Yeah. And afterwards you go, well, it was bloody obvious. Yes. It was every single song he was singing about it. Yeah. But and the band themselves would say this. They didn't think that he really meant it, because we were used to hearing Bowie and Iggy and the Velvet Underground. You didn't think they meant it.
Also, it's amazing how you can be in a band and actually never know the words of the songs you're playing.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you're too busy playing the guitar or whatever it is. All of that. I mean, at the end of the podcast, we'll play another quote, which is actually really good. It's Bernard Sumner again, talking about the first time he ever went round to Ian Curtis's house. And Ian Curtis played him China Girl, Iggy Pop, and then he played him Bowie, and then he played him Krautrock.
Yes,
all of which are out of his experience.
That's right.
He just hadn't heard these people.
No, it's extraordinary that to hear Bernard say he'd never listened to Iggy Pop.
Yes,
in 1970,
he was like a Wishbone Ash man.
Yeah,
that's
right.
I mean, you'd heard Bowie, but you hadn't heard Low, which is what Ian Curtis played him.
Because in a way, there was still an expert end of things. And a band would always have the expert, and the further you move back into the band to the drummer, it got less expertise. It was more just playing. And Ian, in that sense, was the curator, as the modern word would be, in terms of opening up all these influences.
Sure. I mean, it's a very good this interview. I mean, they're talking about Brotherhood's just come out, and about how basically they wrote most of it in the studio, and also how they'd make decisions. And it's sort of democratically, the band was, in a way that very few bands are, that there is discussion about what's going to be used, and a consensus is reached of some description.
Yes.
Do you believe that?
Well, I know for a fact, when I talked to any engineer later that worked with New Order, they would say, in all sincerity, they had no bloody idea how it worked, that somehow it did. Individually they came together, well, the Stephen and Gillian Access, the Hooky and the Barney. Yeah. But they had no idea how it worked technically, it just did.
That's sort of the impression I get.
And in a way, they were all in their separate zones.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, my favourite quote about Barney, about Hooky, was, I wish that bastard would stop playing those bloody bass guitar solos over my great songs. Because Hooky would just play this bass, and then it would be chopped up almost into its component parts, fair enough, Yeah. But of course, later it would seem so coherent, you would never know that. So they were coming in from different places.
The irony is that Peter Hook reminds me more of Chris Squire from Yes than any other musician.
That's a most excellent call.
Which I'm not sure many people would want to hear that, but he really plays like Chris Squire used to play with his early climbing.
But he soloed all the time, a bit like Entwistle as well, just constantly.
Just constantly soloing, and Barney would, he would like an married couple.
Grated terribly.
But Stephen talks about the first three albums, kind of very interestingly. He talks about Peter Saville's album sleeves. They also talk about, it's a kind of meta interview. They talk about being interviewed a lot.
This is Martin Aston interviewing them, and sort of at one point, Martin is a strange interview because he's always asking why. Why did you do this? Why did you make this album? Why do you do interviews? It's like, which you would almost think, why do I? I'm off.
But that spirals into the bit in Stephen Morris's interview where they actually talked about 10 minutes about being interviewed. I mean, it's very odd.
Very meta.
Play next quote, which is about New Order not being a proper group.
Yes.
So, New Order aren't a proper group? No,
I don't think we are. We're not, I don't think we ever will be.
proper group, one who goes out and, you know, like, just quirky little things like don't want mine on telly. You know, if we mind on telly, we could be on telly a lot more because it's a real hassle playing live. But I think it's a con. You know, you try to make it seem like you're better than you are. The average person's got to see you on telly. I think that's what you actually sound like. You know, I've got to realise that sound took months of production or something.
Interesting stuff. I mean, the sound quality isn't great because it's backstage. I think at the Albert Hall. I think
they've just played a show. They've clearly just played it. I mean, because you referred back to Town and Country, and apparently they were brilliant. And then I don't know what. Well, venue
anyway, they were about to play another show. Promoting the album because the album came out in September of '86, and this is 6th of October. Anyway, it's good stuff.
I mean, what's your take on New Order, Paul? I'm intrigued to know, you know, compared to Joy Division, and there's been many more years of New Order. What are your feelings about the New Order corpus of work?
They were an entirely different group.
Yeah.
Although Barney does say how, what you were saying before about Ian playing Barney records.
Right.
Because of Ian, the Kraftwerk was beginning to come into Joy Division anyway.
Right.
Around the time Ian died, you know, it was an element that would have come, and they may well have gone electronic the way they did anyway, because Ian was as alert to what was going on as anybody in that sense. And what was interesting is also the time thing is interesting with New Order, because they're one of the few groups that have managed to survive for 40 years, but somehow still seem to fit into everything else, which I think is partly to do with their attitude towards things. They don't engage. They're not a group in that sense. Long periods of time go by when nothing much happens. Barney hates playing live. You know, I think he's only playing live a little bit more now to get up Peter's nose. Because Peter, I don't know if you know, but Peter allegedly said when they weren't going to use him anymore live, he said it's a bit like Queen without Freddie Mercury, which I think was, and much to his annoyance, they then just used tapes of him playing, so it didn't matter as long as the sound was there. No one really noticed him.
That's a pretty big schism, wasn't it, between Hook and the rest of the band?
Huge, I think.
Yes, Barney put it down to the way Peter would eat crisps. He just couldn't stand saying it in the van
That's
anymore.
the thing that makes you snap in the end, in a marriage or a business.
But of course,
box.
you know, they spent a large amounts of time not together, you know, and they were an illusion. And I suppose none of us realised it would carry on for 40 years.
No.
Yes, I mean, you write beautifully in the book about the song Temptation, which it reminded me in some ways that's like my favourite New Order track. I don't think they ever got any better than that. And I can't say I love a lot of New Order. I mean, there's the odd track that I think is great, but it just doesn't do for me what Joy Division did.
Yeah, Temptation for me was very much in that period between Love Will Tear Us Apart and Blue Monday.
Yes,
when New Order weren't actually taking off, and there were, and I wrote that particular piece in the NME because the NME's attitude was they were done. It was all over, and of course Blue Monday hadn't yet come and found that wonderful Manc way of making the house rhythm accessible to white kids. It was quite a breakthrough, I think, in terms of that white dance kids suddenly emerging. It was Blue Monday.
Blue Monday is basically like a sort of Boys Town disco.
Hannett produced all that stuff too, didn't he? He produced the early.
Well, that's a good question.
New Order stuff.
He produced Movement,
right. Which is it's still Joy Division,
which is a transference ceremony.
Because
Ceremony is a good record.
He was always very interested in repetition, almost like sort of dance music repetition. And I mean, he helped develop the AMS digital delay because that's been built just down the road.
Right,
and they'd bring one into his studio and chuck it into his rack, which is really effectively a very early sampler, you know, like a 10-second sampler. And Hannett was very interested in this sort of automating of grooves.
Yes.
And
that, I think, is something which carried on through New Order's
to some degree, although I think sonically it's a lot less interesting. Provocative question. Yeah. If it hadn't been for Martin Hannett, would we be talking about Joy Division?
Probably not, in the sense that it had that kind of timelessness that if the Barney and Hooky had been responsible for the sound, it wouldn't have had. And of course, they didn't really like it because it was doing something that didn't make sense to them. Because the Black Sabbath Wishbone Ash side of them kicked in. And it
I didn't know there was even a Black Sabbath side to join.
You know, I think Hannett was thinking, okay, if you want your Black Sabbath, I'll give you some Pierre Ubu and mix the two up.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, right.
So there was that element,
Yeah.
you know. But I think absolutely, in terms of all producers ultimately creating what we now think as, you know, a Jimmy Miller with the Stones or whatever. We're hearing Jimmy Miller largely, you know, and that sort of invisible side of it. Even the engineers often even didn't get any kind of credit as songwriters, were making an enormous contribution to the songs themselves, you know. Yeah. And I think Hannett absolutely. But then, you know, it's a mix, isn't it? I think it's Hannett, it's Gretton's attitude, it's Saville, and it's Wilson.
It's a bit of everything,
even though Wilson's got nothing to do with it directly. Somehow the combination of conversations he would have with them in his cheerleader way fed into the confidence of the group.
Yeah,
So even though Ian is on a trajectory that leads obviously where it leads, he's being cheerleaded by Tony. You know, not
completely.
Quite understanding to his ultimately it's more personal chagrin that he didn't help Ian in a way that he could have, but could he?
Yeah, but also,
not, you know?
I mean, that's the times. I mean, people talk far more about where they're at emotionally and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
There's all of that sort of stuff. You know, back in the late 70s, early 80s, we were so buttoned up.
And also it was effectively snap out of it.
Yeah.
What's one of the things I always loved about your writing, Paul, because I mean, I started writing for NME early 81, something like that. And you did write very, I mean, is emotionally the wrong word? I mean, but you did obviously put yourself into it, which to me was more honest. And you actually talked about how music affected you emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah, it seemed important. I always thought it was a funny argument that I guess reached its, you know, cultural wars, visible cultural wars element with the Q element of it, because there was this sense that if you put yourself in the piece, it was somehow wrong and that you should have this objectivity. But I would always argue that even if you didn't use I or me, it's still about you.
It's still
so.
Subjective.
What are you hiding?
There is no view from nowhere.
No,
right?
absolutely.
That's
And for me, I guess also because it was from very early days, the fact that I was going off to interview Debbie Howe and Patti Smith and Chrissie Hynde and Mark Bowl and Iggy Pop and Lou Reed before I was even 21, 22, I had to report on this experience apart from anything else because it was a ridiculous thing to be doing. I'm suddenly in a room with Patti Smith.
Yes.
How can I not say how I feel about it? You know, it's ridiculous.
I agree.
Do you think your style then kind of just developed organically, or did you kind of choose to recognise this thread of style and you kind of pursued it? You talked earlier about your writing style. So
I think it developed out of the things I was interested in and what turned me on, and also how to structure pieces. I was always very interested in how you structured a feature, and very interested in those people that set precedent in that world. You know, Richard Meltzer and Idris Walters. You know, I love the way that they would make a piece, an entertainment, an event, a thing separate. It was different, it was distinctive. And I always try to make every single piece I wrote have a different structure. It was very important to me as a piece of as a way of making something not the same as everything else. And as more and more people have joined in, I think that's really quite interesting, that about 99% of people write about music more or less the same way. And therefore they're not using style.
No.
And therefore they're not really representing what they feel about music, because they're leaving an awful lot out about your own personal response to it. You know, which is abstract. It's not necessarily a commercial or a critical judgment. It's more abstract than that.
Shall we talk briefly about the week's featured act on the homepage, which is Faust? They were obviously a Krautrock group defined by in a piece that were featured by Ian MacDonald from early 73 in NME. He calls them by far the most extreme of the German experimental bands. I thought it'd be interesting just to talk about them because they have a box set out, 1971 to 74, their great albums. And to some extent, what we call Krautrock was, you know, had some influence or cast some sort of shadow over the Manchester sound, didn't it, I think? And I just wondered whether you... So my question would be, did you get into Faust and Neu and Krautrock and everything at a relatively early point? Or?
Pretty immediately. Yeah. I mean, one of the great doorways was the 48 pence Faust tapes, where you're suddenly buying an album you could afford.
Yeah.
And therefore, some people hoped it would sound like Slade, and we turned off that kind of music forever. Because they would have bought a single. They could have bought a single for 48p, but they thought, I'll buy an album. And it had a Bridget Riley sleeve. It looked amazing. It was fantastic. It was fabulous. It was obviously a marketing thing from Virgin Records, but we didn't know that. And it was a work. It struck me immediately as something I adored, and very early you had an instinctive response, and some people would fall off, and other people would say. And I think everybody that more or less formed some of those early bands, but certainly the Fall, and certainly when you would listen to John Peel, and you would have this wonderful combination where it would go from a German record to a dub record to an old rock and roll record, and the language seemed the same. It shared something. And that I always think the Fall sounded like an early John Peel show, all just in one place. You know what I mean? Because that's what you were hearing.
They were really,
slid from thing to thing, and in the middle of that would be Noi and Tangerine Dream and
you, Roy.
Absolutely.
I certainly bought that when it came out because it's a cheap record, and everyone I knew sort of did. And you're absolutely right. It kind of split its audience because for every kind of 5 people who hated it, there'll be like 2 people who thought it was just the most interesting thing they'd heard in their lives. And then, of course, then we'd all go out and get Tega Mega by Can, for example. I mean, there was a sort of process. Where
absolutely, one thing led to the other, and obviously very quickly you've got groups like Cabaret Voltaire emerging, and Daniel Miller, and that's coming out of that, and that's connected very definitely with punk, because they're, it's almost like, crudely speaking, the return of a single. So oddly, out of this weird psychedelic music that had come from Germany, it filtered into people making singles and disrupted and subverted the idea of what a single
I think
could
it also had this valuable quality that it sounds quite... Angry is not necessarily the right word, but the Germans didn't sound optimistic. It's not sort of...
Although quite playful and pranksterish in their way.
But there is a darkness there, which is that to do with our perception, because they're German and we're still carrying this baggage around.
Well, also they were
carrying the baggage around.
They're repairing as well. They're repairing society. Right. They're repairing a gap in the 20th century.
Absolutely.
And working out what would have happened if that didn't exist. And they're listening to what's coming from the Grateful Dead and that kind of music coming over, Quicksilvers and all these things. And somehow that need to repair also connected with punk. And certainly with Johnny Lydon, with Public Image, for instance. It sounds angry, it sounds ugly, it sounds distressing, because in a way they're trying to repair something that has broken down.
Right. And they were consciously rejecting the sort of Anglo-American tradition.
All the cliches.
I mean, there's so even in this early piece by MacDonald, it's Uwe Nettelbach, is that how you would pronounce it? Uwe, Uwe Nettelbach, who of course had a very radical background and was tangentially involved with the Red Army faction and all of that. And he talks explicitly about we wanted not to be influenced by any of that West Coast music, so it's very
that's why it was unfortunate that it did get called Krautrock.
Absolutely.
Because in a way it became almost a gimmick in a funny sort of way. I mean, musicians and young musicians at the time didn't respond to it as a gimmick, but there was a sense that it had been packaged and tamed a bit like world music.
Again, the enemy subs, and we have ways of making you listen.
Of course.
It's just a terrible...
Jasper, what's your take on this?
Did it feel then like they were speaking a different musical language from what was being...
Certainly when you listen to the Faust tapes,
But did it feel kind of radical, like a sort of different angle?
Well, but it was refreshing because of that. Because I mean, my early take on it was very much that which would be more contentious to say now, but it was interesting conceptually at the time that it had come from a different place than the blues, and we were very used to that, and we knew where that was going and what had happened with that, and it had turned negative in a way. So the idea there was suddenly a new influx of incredible ideas that were coming from all sorts of places, like Barney was saying, also from art places as well. There was an art approach to the making of music.
I also felt, I was a big Can fan back then, 72, 73, 74, and I was a Grateful Dead fan, and I could see what they'd got from, as you just said, Quicksilver and Grateful Dead, from that psychedelic exploration sort of. That was in there. It sounded quite different, but it's there. There's that's so. I mean, it sounded very different. But there's enough in there.
And also what they're doing in a way, many of these German musicians were like classical musicians.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they'd made this extraordinary choice that is still rare, to be influenced by things outside the classical tradition. So suddenly they're throwing in all sorts of elements. Kraftwerk, to me, were always a classical ensemble who happened to make pop music. And just did it sublimely, you know. But they were rooted in Brahms and Bach as much as they were in the Beach Boys and whatever
also
else.
Very rooted in Stockhausen and people like that.
Absolutely.
Who then actually, some of them had actually worked with, you know. So,
and I think again that has to do with trying to create something from rubble. Is trying to
it's building a
back
new society.
if you can find it on iTunes, there's a really good series about the development of German electronic music and studios after the war.
It's fascinating because there was a lot of investment.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, partly from the American,
the Allied kind of
the Marshall Plan and everything, but then the studios suddenly became. Interestingly, because there was some lingering equipment that had been developed by the Nazis that kind of
very good
was
stuff,
revolutionary.
like these sort of big microphones.
Right, exactly. So there's this really strange confluence of factors that
and headphones, and also it was that idea that the first 3 Kraftwerk albums that they sort of disown. Was also interesting because it came out of that world, the world of the laboratory, the technology. And then they realised that what they needed to put into it was almost that moment the Moog synthesizer gets a keyboard. Previously, it's just buttons and it's formless noise. Suddenly, it has a keyboard and it becomes a musical instrument. You know, it becomes percussive. There's rhythm suddenly, and Kraftwerk a great symbol of that change. You know?
I wanted to read just the last of the piece about Faust. Is by David Stubbs, who, of course, wrote the definitive Krautrock book. This is from 2004 in The Wire. And he'd sent off for these... Chris Cutler had reissued all the early Faust albums, and he waited 10 months for them to arrive, you know, bated breath. They finally arrived, and he says, I tried to interest schoolmates in Faust via a show and tell session during general studies. I mean, he must be like 14 or something. I didn't get past track 1, Why Don't You Eat Carrots? A coalition of sixth form punks, he's in sixth form, a coalition of sixth form punks and proggies jeered and stamped their feet with the deliberate intention of making the needle skip about the vinyl, creating a fast-cut musical montage of their own. Funny at my expense, naturally. But there was a baying, reactionary fury underlying their derision, reminiscent of crowds who rioted at the premiere of The Rite of Spring.
What's glorious about that as well is that reminder of when music was really taken seriously as a matter of life or death. You know, that hierarchy that's broken down now, and ABBA was suddenly the Velvet Underground, you know. Back then, that thing that you really were, you know, you had your side and you were on it and you would fight it tooth and nail because it was so important.
I'd taken my brother's copy of White Light Heat to a party when I was at school. I was about kind of 13 or 14. And I put it on and everyone's like, you take it off, man, you're bringing us down.
It's a bummer, man. Here, have a toke on this. Fantastic. That was brave of you. Sister Ray.
Ray.
Let's get a...
I'll get the kids dancing.
So that's Faust. I do want to just mention in passing, before we talk about the new library highlights, that we've lost 2 of our writers this week. Bob Fisher, who was an NME writer. Have you ever overlapped with Bob Fisher, Paul? Probably not. But he was, along with like Cliff White, Bill Miller and others, one of the first... Roger St. Pierre. And Tony Cummings. One of the first sort of notable like white writers on black American music.
Absolutely,
White English writers on... So wrote a lot about soul and funk and, you know, went on the road with the Ohio Players, etc. And came to have lunch with us a couple of years ago, I think, with Bill Miller. And it was a very, it was a very sudden heart attack and... 74, so very sad to lose him. Also, another, white expert on black rhythm and blues and other American musics, Pete Grendysa, one of the sort of scholars of particularly rhythm and blues, and did numerous sort of sleeve notes for Bear Family box sets of, like Little Esther Phillips and so forth. So a real scholar, connoisseur of that stuff. And so we're adding a piece. The piece by Bob we're adding is about soul style in the Midlands. So it's in the Northern Soul era, but he's going to like soul discos in the Midlands and reporting on the baggies that they're wearing. Pete's piece is about the making of rhythm and blues. It's got a scholarly piece about how rhythm and blues actually was sort of born.
I heard yesterday that Dion Estes, the Wham's bass player, died.
Yes, that's correct.
And his kind of role was to bring black credibility to this white pop band. He was kind of a dreadlocked bass player. Very good player.
Very good player.
So
yes.
There we go.
Yes, and we have also lost Paddy Moloney of the Chieftains, but none of us feel really qualified to talk about the Chieftains. But suffice to say, there are 2 interviews with Paddy that we're featuring on the homepage, so we say goodbye to... can anyone pronounce the name of the pipes that he...
the Ulian or whatever it is, something like that.
Ilian? I think it's a little closer to Ilian.
Ilian, okay.
I'm not sure. I could be completely
Celtic
wrong.
Pronunciation, isn't it? Anyway, a huge figure in the history of Irish music. Mark, tell us about some of the pieces you've added.
Yeah, the last fortnight.
And jump in any time that you feel the spirit takes
compelled.
Compelled.
By the spirit.
Rory O'Grady interviews Keith Richards, Ray of 1965, and he's talking about the old... Was it Edith Grove or Gunter? Is it Edith Grove?
Edith Grove. I'm pretty sure it was Edith Grove.
And he says you had to light a candle to go upstairs to the toilet, and the only thing that worked was Brian's radiogram. I love that radiogram. This sort of that was
the only thing that worked in the whole house.
It worked in the house until Keith broke it. Penny Valentine singles reviews Disc and Music Echo, November '66. Reviewing Lorraine Ellison's Stay With Me.
Titanic record.
And this is what Penny Valentine has to say. She said, out of all the records I get in, I have a very special collection of about 40 that all have something very special for me. This goes straight to the top of that pile. Ignoring the prejudiced cries of my office colleagues, hysterical nonsense, neurotic noise, I give you Stay With Me. I give you a spine-tingling song of utter despair, sung by this girl with shrieking possessiveness. It is impossible to explain what this record does to me, and I'm sorry to say its appeal will be limited. But please listen to it, and have your emotions shredded and shattered, and admire anyone who can stand in between 4 cold studio walls and let go like this.
Wow.
Isn't it great?
God bless Penny.
Somebody gets it immediately, and nothing changes.
And nothing changes.
Ever since.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of my favourite records ever, you know.
And someone's described
what a great piece of
perfectly,
writing that is.
poetically,
Gives you
straight
chills,
away.
And probably her male colleagues who can't handle the emotion of it, describe it as, dismiss it as hysterical nonsense.
Except Nolan's probably too stoned and underneath the office desk.
Neurotic noise, man.
Neurotic noise.
But no, it's fantastic stuff. David Griffiths interviewing Roger Waters, Pink Floyd, in '67, and he said, we had some photographs done, only in black and white, using a psychedelic slide superimposed on us. Some fans had written asking for pictures, wrote back wondering if we'd spilt something on the pictures. They really believe something had gone wrong. I love it. Also, Nick Mason's in the same thing, and remember they trained as architects. He says, I'm always on the lookout for someone who's £500,000 to spare who wants me to design in my house.
I love the spilling.
That's great.
Maybe that's the true birth of psychedelia.
Yes.
Someone's spilled a glass of water on a colour picture.
Robert Shelton saw a multi-band lineup in the New York Times in '68. One of them was Iron Butterfly, who I saw Yes supporting Iron Butterfly.
Lucky boy.
In 1971. Yes was superb. Iron Butterfly were Iron Butterfly. He says, Iron Butterfly also mainly on a psychedelic rock heavy tangent, with full phalanxes of sound roaring from stage. The group went out with a production number that sounded and looked like a plane crash, with 4 fires on stage. Unfortunately, it was as comfortable as a crash. But how else does an Iron Butterfly depart?
Ooh. I love that name. Which came first, Led Zeppelin or Iron Butterfly?
That's good. That's
let's call ourselves like juxtaposed two really different elements.
That's a good question. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Iron Butterfly.
I think Iron Butterfly did come before them.
Page was very aware of all the American kind of rock groups, and Vanilla Fudge were part of the prototype for Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Patti Smith interviewed by Stephen DeMorris, Sounds, 1978. And I'd never read this before. She says that she suffered naturally from hallucinations as a girl, as a young woman, used to hallucinate. She says, I was at a party once, and suddenly a lily came out of my mouth, and then it became a huge trumpet. With that kind of stuff going on, why should I want to take acid?
Yeah.
Very good.
When you mentioned Patti Smith earlier, I mean, it isn't. I was going to say one always forgets. We don't forget, but in a way, for me, as a punter and reader of the NME and so forth, it was Horses. Really, was sort of the beginning of punk rock. Really.
Yes,
I think, even though I had MC5 albums and Stooges albums, that was sort of the birth of the sensibility. And I saw the Roundhouse show.
Yes, me too. Yes, definitely.
I couldn't get in. I was outside.
Were you? Sorry about that. I nicked your ticket.
And I guess Lenny in the middle of it helped that as well. And just that sheer drama. Because it was a rebirth in a way, wasn't it? It was something beginning again, and so the minimalism of it was great. The black and whiteness,
more great cover art.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, a girl in the flat I shared bought it when it came out, and we just listened to it obsessively.
Sure.
I mean, I went off her quite quickly after that because I was getting into other stuff, you know. Yeah. But that first album, I thought, Horses, I thought was just extraordinary.
We actually have Lenny is going to be a guest on the podcast in November.
So the next question.
Send in your questions.
Yes. Yeah. the next one is Lenny and I knew we weren't great at the beginning, but we felt like human alarm clocks. Wake up! Wake up!
Yeah. I think that's what it was, actually, that sense of there's something much more out there that we're not getting.
Yes.
And suddenly she showed us the way.
Yes.
Almost just those moments before she started as well, just the sheer presence.
I mean, it's that and then a Ramones album coming out with all these kind of like 1.5 minute songs on, and it was like...
It was interesting, coming from New York again,
absolutely.
That sense that there's just a compression of sensation into music.
I can remember where I was when I heard both those albums the first time, and I can't say that about many records.
Me too. Yes, so true.
Moving quite a long way forward, and staying in Manchester as it happens, is Martin Price of 808 State to Dully for Dully, the Enemy in 1990. And it's about ecstasy basis. I don't want anyone coming up to me after they've had drugs telling me how much they love me.
I thought that was the whole point of ecstasy. Do you have a comment on that?
No.
How many people came up and told you they loved you, and how many people did you approach say, you're my best
Mostly,
mate.
I hate you. But I do remember Martin telling me very early doors about Hacienda, what was happening, and 808 State and everything, and he basically seemed to be telling me there was a tremendous amount of whistling. People blowing whistles.
That's absolutely right.
I said, I don't know whether that's going to lure me in, really, the whistling.
No, I need more than whistles.
But it was very exciting.
Actually, the other problem that the Hacienda had, it was a horrible sounding room. It looked beautiful, but the acoustics were dreadful.
Well, that was its legend, really, yes.
The times I would go there, it's just like, you can't listen to loud music.
Everything was wrong about it.
I actually went to the opening night. Were you on the bus that went up to London? I have a memory of you. You were already in Manchester.
I was in Manchester that night.
I remember seeing you there.
Yes.
I mean, I just ended up on this bus that departed from Rough Trade in July '82. Was it something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you were there the Bernard Manning night and everything.
Was Bernard Manning?
Yeah,
I remember ESG.
Yes.
Yeah, ESG, who I had already fallen in love with, and good.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's great. This week, Dusty Springfield's Penny Valentine again, Disc Music Echo 67. Dusty says, I do believe in God, though most people I know don't. Sometimes I think it's a shame that people are so godless.
Godless.
One thing about Dusty Springfield is that she's always, even though she obviously doesn't like being interviewed and is quite reticent, she's also emotionally honest. She talks about, and this is going right back to when she was like a pop star, 65, 66. She will say what she's thinking about things. Which is,
and she didn't play the game really.
No.
I mean,
but it was interesting how many didn't, and at that period when no one really knew what a pop interview was, you do get these wonderful moments of truth, don't you? It's guarded,
you do, yes.
PR'd, and
in between the favourite colours and the favourite food.
That's right.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
You get these
I mean, it's like we got that Maureen O'Grady into. No, it's the other rave writer,
Dawn James.
Dawn James. she interviewed Eric Clapton just after he had left the Yardbirds. And she really gets how depressive he is. You know, you're reading this, and this is for kids' kind of teens magazine, and you really get the sense of what a depressive this guy is through her interviewing him and writing it up. It's really good stuff.
Clapton, whose name has almost become like persona non grata on this podcast now.
Unbelievable.
We have cancelled Eric Clapton. I mean, I'd cancelled him years ago on musical grounds, but he's now cancelled for this fucking insane shit he talks about.
Oh, yeah.
I'm loving it, actually.
I'm loving it,
Lon Goddard interviewing Charlie Watts in 1969. He says, I suppose I could even put a drum solo in a Stones number, but they'd have to ask for it, since I'd probably never suggest it. He says, I've never found something I really wanted to do outside the Stones. I know it must sound boring, but it's not. It's a nice interview. You know, I mean, he doesn't get interviewed much.
I remember Chris Blackwell telling me, of Island Records, telling me that he was there more or less when the great transformation happened in drummers between the Stones' early one, whose name, forgive me, I've forgotten, but the first drummer who couldn't really drum was all over the shop, and Charlie was coming in, and Charlie was obviously suddenly a world-class drummer, jazz drummer, and Chris said it was just this wonderful moment of transition as one drummer leads to the drummer. You know,
fantastic. Johnny Rotten, the Sex Pistols, been interviewed by Barry Kane and Record Mirror in '76. The interview was recorded before the Grundy episode, but printed after. So it was basically kind of like recorded Grundy.
Definitely after the Lesser Free Trade Hall.
And this says about how the tour has just gone, evaporated and so on and so forth. And he sort of, think about Rotten, is that at the time you're reading something that's kind of interesting, and then you read it now and it's like, it's often really boring and predictable shit he's saying. Groups like the Who and the Stones are revolting. They have nothing to offer the kids anymore.
But at the time, and also, I said it to Mick Jagger's face. That's how angry we were.
You're revolting.
In 1980, I said, "You're revolting. Why don't you retire?" You're thinking about it now. What, about 35?
Legitimate question.
But I was really angry, And I always remember afterwards, he talked to someone after me, and they used to think, and in the piece it went, "Yeah, I've just had the NME in here. Seemed very uptight." I was so proud.
Well, good for you.
Don and David was Sam Sutherland, High Fidelity in 1984. Sam Sutherland's a writer who just got on board, much to my pleasure, because he's written about a lot of good stuff. Don says, we looked at people like James White and saw some white guy doing dance music and sticking an Albert Ayler. Which is,
for sure.
That's very, very.
Worth mentioning. We our next guest, is none other than Michael Zilker.
Oh wow, Michael! Oh my God!
So
yes.
I think it's Michael Zilker followed by Lenny Kaye. Not bad.
That's
pretty
good.
good.
It all happens.
Fingers crossed. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Don't move for the next month.
Well, I think that's my lot for the.
That's your lot.
Very good.
Jasper, in the interest of time, I'm just going to hand directly over to your good self.
I've got just a couple of things to mention. The first of which is a review. Barbara Allen in the Times reviewing Primal Scream's Exterminator. She has to say, suggesting that you might like the new Primal Scream album is a bit like saying you might enjoy having a helicopter explode in your living room. The latest offering from Bobby Gillespie and the Scream is not comfortable listening, more a case of extreme psychological indigestion, brought on by the complacent state of modern British rock music.
Should we not be calling it
Exterminator.
As Martin Skirtle. Yes. We were trying to come up with names that don't have any vowels in, and I think the title
it is,
removes all vowels.
Although the Times, the published Times, calls it Exterminator.
Paul, what's your take on
readership
Primal Scream? Did they sort of mean anything to you at all?
They never really meant anything. I suppose only the Jimmy Miller, wasn't it, that basically did the Stones sound
did
alike.
a lot of
So I like the Jimmy Miller elements, but I must admit they've grazed past me a little bit.
I mean, very much me too. It's partly because I actually can't abide the lead singer's voice.
Well, a bit like Barney Sumner. He's one of the great non-singers, isn't he, really?
Yeah, but he thinks he's a good singer. Barney Sumner's actually knows what he's doing.
Knows he can't sing. Sure. That's probably right. Well, Bobby Gillespie, of course, has an autobiography coming out very soon, so he's all over me. In fact, Barbara Ellen just did another interview with him 21 years later.
How about that?
On Sunday in The Observer.
That's the one thing that has surprised me, is that we are talking in these time spans.
Yes.
Bobby Gillespie 21 years ago.
I know.
Something went wrong there.
It's called growing old.
But also that they are still pretty much
Can't be that simple.
there and, not there at the same time. And 21 years can pass and we're still sort of talking about them in the same sort of way we were 21 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a sort of...
Unlike talking about Mick Jagger, for example.
Well, I told him he should have resigned.
Yes.
You were right. Spot on there.
Yeah. Next up, not to step on your toes, Mark, I know you like talking about John Sinclair, but I found his invisible jukebox in The Wire. Edwin Pouncey did one of those things where they play a bunch of records somewhere. And it's a really lovely interview. I mean, he obviously managed the MC5 and was a White Panther and all sorts of stuff, but it's great.
He definitely wasn't a Black Panther.
No, he wasn't. He actually talks about setting up the White Panthers in this interview. It's very funny. They kind of got vetted by the Black Panthers as to why they were doing this kind of thing. But Edwin plays him a Robert Northern with Max Roach record that I don't think John Sinclair recognises, but it kind of leads on to being in the style of the MC5's religious advisor, brother J.C. Crawford, and he asks what he actually did. And there's this whole story about, they came up to them at a gig and were like, do you mind if we come on up on the break and say something about Zenta? We're religious leaders, we have this religion. And they said, yeah, whatever, we're happy to accommodate you. And they said all this gobbledygook that really didn't make any sense, but they were convincing, and then they'd pass the hat. When they came down and were counting their money, we realised they were really hustling money for beer and drugs. So naturally, this really endeared them to us, much more than the religious aspect, and we became pals with them. And then, so they went on and developed this whole thing, and they had this plan of, institutionalising it. They bought houses under Zenta, and they were owned by the first Zenta church, and they were trying to claim that marijuana and psychedelic drugs were sacraments, and that was going to be their legal way of taking drugs. It's just a great story, great scheme.
Yeah, brilliant.
And he also mentions the MC5 playing with Sun Ra at the Grandee Ballroom, and just how thrilling that was. And
we love John Sinclair. I mean, he's actually one of our writers.
We should get him on the podcast.
We really should.
We should. That's a great idea.
He'd be such a good guest.
Yeah.
One thing I loved about the whole MC5 scene is that they loved out their jazz. They really did, and they understood it. So it's them and Sun Ra on the same stage. That makes perfect sense.
John Sinclair?
No. But he was in a lot of those early American compendiums that I would have, and I always
Guitar Army. You must have bought Guitar Army at some point.
And just the way he enthused and promoted
such a
he went to jail for
nice guy.
He went to jail for 2 joints because that was in America in those days, and he was seen as a threat because he's really political. And he's jailed. And
you were arrested for how many joints?
Sorry,
you were arrested
for a lump of hair.
You should have gone down for 6 months.
Well, he went down for more than that. I mean, it was a proper sentence. And John Lennon and Yoko came over and stuff.
That's right.
Doing all that stuff.
It's that sense of danger that's gone as well. I used to like the danger. The music came out of real danger. In all sorts of ways.
He talks about all that in it. It's well worth reading. It's just great. And
I've met him. You've met him, haven't you? He's a sweet.
He gave me a tour of Detroit.
Yeah, he's such a gentleman.
It'd be super to have him on the podcast. So, John, if you're listening...
Yeah, John, phone in.
Cool, that's it, that's my lot.
That's it, brilliant. Well, that brings us to the end of the podcast, except to thank you so much for joining us today, Paul. From Manchester with Love, The Life and Opinions of Tony Wilson is published, I believe, in a week or so?
Yes.
By Faber. It is absolutely terrific, as are all your books. I mean, you're very, very prolific. I mean, you published a book on Dylan, the cover star of Out There.
Yes, Out There #2. A lot of these things are Out There #2.
And I really liked your book. I like your Bowie book very much.
Thank you. Well, I know about
very favourable.
You were very generous.
Very favourably for somebody. The Observer?
But it was Barney Hoskins, that's all that mattered to me.
Anyway, so listen, thanks for joining us. We're so pleased to have had you on RVP for so many years and great for that.
Absolutely.
Good luck hawking this around.
Thanks for that. Brutal summary.
And Mark, we are going to hear one last. It's worth staying for this last clip.
Yeah, it's great. It's Bernard Sumner talking about his early engagement.
Going around essentially to ask Ian to join Warsaw, join Stiff Kittens or Warsaw or whatever the hell it was at that point.
I do believe we have the write-up of Warsaw before they became
Joy
Division.
We do. They're mentioned fleetingly in a live review along with sort of 3 or 4 other bands.
So this is Bernard. I'm not American. Bernard Sumner.
It's not Bernard Edwards.
Bernard Fowler.
Talking about Ian Curtis.
Let's
have a listen.
Well, and we'll be back in 2 weeks, hopefully with Michael Zilka. So this is all of us saying goodbye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
What would it be like if Ian was still singing with you?
I don't know, because you see, Ian was physically ill, he had epilepsy really badly. I don't know whether that I would have got worse or would have got bad, so physically it would have been impossible, I would think, for him to carry on. Ian was a spotter, what I like to call a spotter. In life, yeah.
Sorry, he was what?
A spotter.
A spotter?
Yeah. He spotted something that was good. The first day we went round to his house, asked him to join the band. He was playing China Girl by Iggy Pop.
Yeah.
And I went to his house, and I'd never heard Iggy Pop. I said, "What's this record? It's fucking great." He said, "Oh, it's Iggy Pop." I said, "Who's Iggy Pop?" I said, "Oh." I said, "What kind of music do you like anyway? Do you want to join the group? You like the Sex Pistols?" I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "But what's this record? It's great." And it was great.
Oh, it's brilliant.
And I thought, it's really good though. Then he joined the group. And like, he used to play stuff at that time, like 1977. People just like Sex Pistols and the Clash. But he was playing again, Krautrock, David Bowie. And he just opened my eyes completely.
I've been waiting for a guy to come and take me by the hand. Sure, these sensations make me feel the pleasures of a normal man.
That was Bernard Sumner in conversation with Martin Aston in 1986, concluding this week's Rock's Back Pages podcast. Many thanks to special guest Paul Morley. His book, From Manchester with Love, The Life and Opinions of Tony Wilson, is published by Faber and available now. The hosts are Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison Bowie. The Rock's Back Pages podcast is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews, at rocksbackpages.com.